It appears that more and more people are increasingly anti-profit. An increasing number of young people have a favorable opinion of socialism and a negative opinion of capitalism. Now, whether or not they understand what they are is a separate question. That said, one hears more often today anti-rhetoric from the so-called progressives, from professors, from young people. It is not uncommon to hear the following phrases: people before profits, people, not profits, homes for people, not for profit, food for people, not for profit, health care for people, not for profit. Profit is exploitation. This rhetoric is a symptom of growing economic illiteracy and ignorance, both of which will have serious impacts on public policy and thus repercussions concerning liberty and economic prosperity. This video demonstrates this caricature of profit to be completely inaccurate and is meant to show profit's inherent morality and the important role it plays in the marketplace, as profit is necessary to diminish poverty and raise society's standard of living. Before we continue, it is assumed that everybody agrees that the people of a nation will be better off if their resources, their land, their capital, and people produce valuable goods and services. Thus, to get the most out of our resources, projects that increase value must be encouraged, and projects that use resources less productively and decrease value must be discouraged. The best way to do that, both ethically and pragmatically, is to protect the free market. So, in a free society, how do we know if resources are used wisely and efficiently, thus increasing value? Well, a profit is made. To explain, we first must understand what profit is and when a profit is made. Simply put, profit is sales minus costs. A profit is earned when the sales of a product exceed the cost of all the resources required to produce it. Someone earns a profit when that someone produces goods and services consumers value more than the cost of the resources required for their production. But profit is more than sales minus costs. It is good. Profit is the fruit of one's labor. It is a reward for transforming resources into something of greater value. Profit is the result of serving your fellow man and meeting the needs of consumers. Profit is an incentive to work, to innovate, to create, to increase efficiency, to use the least amount of resources as possible. Profit is the mother of invention. Profit is the result of voluntary exchanges, of trade. Profit communicates knowledge about resource use and facilitates learning. Profit is surplus financial capital, which is necessary for investment in capital, in tools, machines, equipment, factories, which is what increases productivity. And more production equals more prosperity. So profit is foundational to prosperity. And freedom, property rights are foundational to profit. By the way, that aspect is covered in another video. To really understand and appreciate profit and its role, we must understand the nature of exchange. Ultimately, only two things can be exchanged: goods and services. If I were to sell my car for money and then use that money to pay for a European vacation, then I essentially traded my car for a European vacation. This is easy to understand if you think of a barter economy where goods are traded for other goods. In such a system, when person A and B trade a rabbit for a fish, both are sellers and both are buyers. And since trade only occurs when both parties perceive they are receiving something more valuable than what they are giving up, both win. Voluntary trade, therefore, is a win-win situation. Both parties profit because all voluntary exchanges end in mutual profit. The same is with money, only money makes the trade indirect. Person A sells their money for a good, and the owner of the good sells it for money. Both profit because both perceive they are receiving something more valuable. Otherwise, they wouldn't have traded. So the key to trade, and thus to profit, is freedom, as only voluntary exchange enables mutual profit. Any coercive transaction is not trade, but theft. Furthermore, trade and profit rest on the subjective nature of value, and because of the nature of trade and the subjective nature of value, profit, as a result of voluntary exchanges, can never be obscene or exploitative. So, before we curse the business with which we make our exchange, remember the nature of trade and mutual profit. Let's now look at the effects profits have on producers, sellers, and entrepreneurs. Because profit is a reward, they encourage businesses to continue. They provide an incentive to find ways to lower production costs and improve quality. And, very importantly, allows for the accumulation of surplus financial capital needed for investment, which is necessary for increasing productivity and people's standard of living. Furthermore, large profits attract potential entrepreneurs or businessmen and investors. They step in and compete. Notice, profits are directing. Take Henry Ford and his assembly line, for example. With no hope of profit, Henry Ford would not have started the automobile industry. Today, however, about a century after the first Model T rolled off the line, Americans can choose from numerous car manufacturers. Why? Because investors stepped in to compete for a share of the profits. Furthermore, his assembly line innovation communicated knowledge and facilitated learning as other businesses began to adopt the assembly line method to help lower costs and increase productivity. Had Ford made no profit, not only would there be no competitors, but Ford himself would have moved on to producing something else. So a lack of profits likewise alerts investors to stay out of a field that lacks significant demand. So what does it mean if a business does not earn a profit but instead incurs a loss? It means he was not able to sell his product at a price higher than what it cost him to make it. Because of losses, businesses are either encouraged to find more cost-effective ways to produce their product so they can turn a profit, or to stop, to end their business. If a company cannot earn a profit, then it cannot stay in business. Keep in mind that businesses use the factors of production, land, labor, capital, to provide a good or service. But those resources have alternative uses that are sacrificed so a particular business can use them. The question that arises then is, when those resources are taken away from other potential uses, how do we know if they were used wisely or unwisely? Well, we know depending on if they earned a profit or not. A profit indicates that a business transformed resources with labor and capital into something of more value. They added value. However, when a business incurs a loss, when it does not earn a profit, it tells us that the resources were transformed into something of less value. Wealth has been lost and resources wasted. Losses tell us that the resources would have been better used producing other things. Based on what we've learned so far, we can safely say that wealth is created. It is not fixed. There are a few ways to illustrate this. One way is to simplify the economy in order to explain a principle that also applies in complex economies. So imagine you are stranded on an island. You wash ashore after surviving a shipwreck and discover you are the only one on this island. You take a day to explore the perimeter of the island and then, completely tired, lay on the beach and sleep until the next day. You wake up incredibly hungry and begin to walk to a tide pool you remember containing a lot of fish. You spend all day trying to catch a fish with your bare hands. Finally, you succeed. But there is no time to build a fire pit and start a fire. So you have sushi. You go to sleep and wake up the next day. Are you better off than you were the day before? No. You are hungry again and head over to the tide pool of fish. You do this for a week, and each day you are no better than the day before. Then you think of an idea. You walk over to a tree, take off a branch, sharpen the edge of the branch into a spear, and use the spear to catch a fish from the tide pool. And you're able to catch one in about an hour's time. As a result, you profit several hours in the day, and you use that profit, those hours of that day, to build a fire pit and to start a fire. You cook your fish, and you still have time left over, and so you begin constructing a shelter. You fall asleep in your partially built shelter, and you wake up the next day. Are you better off than the day before? And now the answer is yes. You have a spear, you have a fire pit with a fire, and a partially built shelter. How did you acquire these things? You created them. You created wealth with the resources from the land, with your labor, and with the help of your spear. Not only does this story illustrate that wealth is created, it also shows the significance of capital, of tools. Taking time to create a spear allowed you to be much more productive at catching fish, and thus profiting time to create other forms of wealth: fire pit, fire, and your shelter. The act of trade, of voluntary exchange, also demonstrates that wealth is created. First, one cannot trade unless they have something to trade. Imagine a barter society. then that means you must first make something others value in order to trade for what you want. Like the island story, making something others value is creating wealth. Second, the very act of voluntary exchange creates wealth as people do not trade unless they value what they are receiving more than what they are giving up. Thus, after voluntary exchange, both parties benefit and are wealthier than they were prior to the trade. And explaining the meaning of profit is a third way to show that wealth is created. As we discussed, when a profit is made, it is because the resources were transformed into something of greater value. Because wealth can be created or lost, businesses must be allowed to fail. Why? Because a business fails when it does not earn a profit, but incurs a loss, which means the business reduced the value of resources. It means the business wasted resources. Thus, allowing businesses to fail, though sad and difficult for those involved, is important because it ends wasteful behavior. Allowing businesses to fail will stop the wasting of resources and redirect those resources toward wealth-creating projects. As a result, that particular business will no longer bid resources away from other more profitable uses. If you're following the economic logic here, this means that subsidizing failing businesses to protect them from failure only allows more resources to be wasted and impedes on economic growth, which results in fewer goods, fewer job opportunities, higher prices, and more negative consequences. Something to remember: subsidies subsidize inefficiency, not to mention the ethical qualms one might have. Speaking of ethics, let's address the question, is profit moral? The answer depends on how the profit is achieved. To help answer this question, we can ask, is bartering unethical? In other words, is the simple act of trading, of voluntary exchange, unethical? When you take something that you own and trade it with somebody else for something they own, are you doing anything that is immoral, unethical? Are you violating that person's rights in any way? And clearly the answer is no. Trading goods for goods is ethical because it respects property rights. There's no force used. The exchange is voluntary. When you trade money for a good, it's no different. It too is ethical. And furthermore, the profit motive encourages people to think about others and their wants, to serve their fellow man. If, however, the profit one achieves as a result of force or the violation of someone's rights, then it is not ethical. Clearly, if someone were to profit by way of burglary, by stealing, then that profit is unethical. It is also unethical if a company chooses to pollute a river that harms others in order to save on costs and earn a profit. Furthermore, using government to force exchanges or show favoritism to benefit some at other people's expense, such as subsidies and protectionism, is an immoral way to earn a profit. One can conclude, therefore, that the morality of profit depends on the nature of the exchange. If the exchange violates the rights of a third party, the profit is immoral. If the exchange involves force, the profit is immoral. Whether an exchange is voluntary or involuntary makes all the difference in the world. Now, the concept or idea of profit, however, is ethical. It arises from morality and reinforces morality. It arises from morality because it is based on the inherent right to trade, and it reinforces morality because it incentivizes people to think about the wants and needs of others, to serve their fellow man. To conclude, with a correct understanding of profit, you can see how anti-profit rhetoric is illogical and harmful. With no profit motive, there will be little to no capital investment or wealth creation. Resources will be wasted, little to no innovation or new technology, not much motivation to work, and standards of living will plummet. Key takeaways from this video include: profits and losses direct business investment toward projects that promote economic progress and away from those that squander scarce resources. This is a vitally important function because economies that fail to perform this function well will almost surely experience stagnation or worse. No,